Welcome to episode 28 of the Retro Game Club podcast. I am Hugh, and joining me, fresh off making some last-minute revisions to Star Wars before sending them to Disney, Rob.
Yeah, it's going to be a doozy. It's funny, and a lot of people that listen to us don't know what I feel about Star Wars because I think 100% of the rants I have had on here, I have edited out. So, still a mystery to our listeners. But yeah, what have you been up to?
So I that sort of short run series I was doing called Dumbest Games to Collect, I think we're just about out of episodes. Again, when you record a bunch of stuff in one great binge and then release it over time, you forget where you left off. Mm-hmm. But since we last recorded our episode about blockbuster exclusives, and then one about some rare boxing games. There actually are rare boxing games that people want to collect. We put those out recently, and I don't remember what I said on there. I'm sure I offend somebody listening to this. When we get to stadium events, that's how you know it's the end, because that's the one we did last. And then, yeah, you know, your Game Club game for this episode got me to fire up, you know, the Super Nintendo Classic and 3DS.
Cool. So we'll talk about those later.
We will talk about those. Yeah. Otherwise, I guess I haven't been playing anything too retro. So what about you?
I just got in the mail the Retrobit 2.4 gigahertz Saturn controller. I'm holding up here. It's nice. Clear blue. I like it, and you know, in our first few episodes, I talked about controllers and how I plug in USB, and I had a few listeners email and ask if I notice latency, you know, over Bluetooth and stuff. Well, I'll tell you, this 2.4 gigahertz compared to Bluetooth, I don't notice any lag. I'm very, very happy with this purchase, and I think I am finally not going to use USB anymore. And let's see. Yeah, I think I've been playing kind of, you know, just quick and little games because my next big game is going to be either Star Wars because it comes out soon or Stadia. I'm a sucker who bought that. So I'll play something on that. And yeah, I got that the game console of a photographic history from Atari to Xbox book. And I also got Arcade Perfect. So I've been kind of flipping through those at night on the couch. That's about it.
Yeah, you're going to be hearing more about Arcade Perfect very soon on this very episode. Mm-hmm. So Stadia, I don't know if you listened to the KEG cast, the Cheap Blank Gamer cast. I'm trying to keep the show PG here. It's a podcast. I've been listening to it literally since like episode 1 or 2. It's a long running show, and I like the personalities on it, and it's really my only connection to modern gaming. So there's 3 hosts on there. And the guy that's the main host, GPD, did a game on a recent episode where he quizzed the other 2 hosts about basic facts about the Google Stadia. So mind you, these are 2 people who follow modern gaming,
yes,
do a modern gaming podcast, love modern gaming. They could not answer one question about the Google Stadia. I cannot think of a system that has been marketed worse because they're not reaching people who might be interested in buying the system and telling them just what it is.
Well, and also it's poor timing because PlayStation Now and Xbox, what is it, Game Pass or Live something, Xbox something, does pretty much the same thing, and you're already in those ecosystems. But I digress, not retro, unless they start releasing retro games on it.
Well, who knows what they're going to, like, it's very,
and Google cancels everything anyway.
Yeah, that's the problem. So, like, everything except the search engine, Google will eventually cancel, and maybe even that one day. Like, that's why I'm really nervous to buy any hardware from Google. Like, I'll buy Chromebooks, but, you know, Google's not making those. It's just someone else basically putting Chrome on top of a very, very lightweight Linux distribution. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, Google hardware is always such a risk because they just love scrapping projects, man.
Hey, and I was thinking about just trying to code something for Daydream, their VR system. Guess what they just announced is no longer supported? Daydream VR.
Yeah.
It's been around for like 3 years.
Yeah. And to me, like, if I was at Google, the thing that I would find most frustrating is how, like, at one point they owned Google Code and they owned Google Plus.
Mm-hmm.
And if they could have figured out how to merge those two, they could have built GitHub before GitHub.
Yep.
And GitHub was just sold for, what, $10 billion? I forget what Microsoft paid for them.
Yeah.
Now, clearly there's a lot of perceived money that is. All right, so this is not the Google Mistakes podcast. That is another episode we will be doing in the future.
Yeah.
What else besides the Stadia? Anything?
Nope, just waiting for Star Wars, and just started Outer Wilds. Not Outer... What's the other? Not Outer Worlds, Outer Wilds, the one that was marketed worse. And it's a very charming game. It's not too expensive, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, should we dive into the episode?
Yes. Hackaday. Projector with embedded NES. What is this?
So, you can put an NES and an NES Mini and a projector right inside of a full-size NES case, and full with like batteries in there and everything. It's pretty portable. So this is a little project on Hackaday that everyone knows we love on this podcast, and I'm not going to do this, but I thought very interesting and cool project.
Yes, I could not do this, but it is amazing looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, I also don't have room for a projector, which is a bigger problem. I guess if I can ever get my basement like hollowed out, I could put one down there. But then it'll just flood anyways, so I guess I'll have to keep dreaming. So a early Famicom text adventure game called Dead Zone, no relation to the Stephen King book, just got an English translation. So this is a so it's a Sunsoft game, and it's like just sort of a common menu based game. You have a menu with move, look, take, that kind of stuff, and you see just a still picture with 3 lines of text. And it's from 1986, and I gotta admit, it looks pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't gotten this one yet, but yeah, I'll check this out.
So always cool to see these games that we never got in America. Finally getting translations. A site I just started following called AtariProjects.org. So a couple times a week they post projects that are usually under 1 hour. This one is they call it 30 to 60 minutes, and they call it Combining Redefined Character Sets and Player Missile Graphics in BASIC, which is kind of a mouthful.
Yeah, what's that mean?
But it's a programming article for basic programming on the Atari computer. This is not Atari 2600 BASIC. So their scope of Atari projects is really anything with Atari in the name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And they do an example of a game that looks like Star Strike meets Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of game. And they talk about like what emulators to use to do this. Like if you had never set any of this stuff up, it's definitely more than a 60-minute project, but it's just got a ton of information about. I found this interesting because it tells you a lot about how to like what basic language to use, what emulator to use.
Mm-hmm.
There's all the steps of going through and setting up a system to do like some old school Atari computer programming.
Yeah, they give you all this. I wouldn't even call them algorithms, more like math that drives all this. Yeah, it looks like a pretty neat game, actually. Yeah, whatever he's building on this site. So they do have a lot of other projects that are just really like read this book, check out this YouTube video. I mean, some of them are really small projects. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of more translation news, maybe I should have grouped these. That would have been smart to do. Space Invaders for Virtual Boy gets an English patch. Blah. Good luck saying that 3 times fast. So, yeah, this is a game that probably didn't need a translation badly, but has one now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Japan exclusive game, obviously. And I haven't played this. It looks like a pretty decent version of Space Invaders.
Yeah, have you noticed that people have been hating on the Virtual Boy less lately? Not saying that it's good, just saying like, at least saying A for effort. There there was 1 or 2 gems on there, considering there was only like 25 games released. Like, that's not a bad ratio.
Yeah, I feel like people are maybe getting it now.
Mm-hmm.
I at the time it was pretty easy to make fun of. I mean, well, you know what the big thing is that you can play it in an emulator now, so you don't have the headache and eye strain problems of playing a real system. And I think when you can put it in an emulator, the red still can be a little bit painful to look at, depending on your vision and all that. But it's a much, much better experience to play Virtual Boy on an emulator than on original hardware. And that's not true of most other systems.
Yeah. And I'm surprised they haven't tried to port like a virtual... Well, I'm not surprised. Nintendo likes to pretend like the system never existed, but what I was going to say is maybe they'll port all these to 3DS as one last thing before ditching it.
Yeah, it may be that the thing we talked about last episode, the analog. Remember the analog? They're making a portable Game Boy FPGA.
Oh yeah.
Oh, they don't have enough buttons on it. Never mind. Their controller. You need more buttons to do Virtual Boy games than what that system will have on it. Yeah. So there you go.
Not going to happen.
But yeah, there's been part of it is there's a pretty vibrant homebrew community for the Virtual Boy. Again, just because it's kind of... I've got the kind of personality that understands wanting to do a program for a weird system that no one will ever play.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain mindset that wants to do that, and I completely understand it.
Yeah, and there's certain people that just love the system, better or for worse. Speaking about new stuff on old systems, Super Mario 64 Land, an enormous fan-made Mario game, is out now. So this is a bit deceiving, but not less cool. This is a patch for a Nintendo 64 or Super Mario 64 ROM that makes a whole new game. It has, I don't see the exact numbers here, but many new levels and bosses and stages and new music. It's technically a mod, but it is a whole standalone new game. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So how will Nintendo get this taken down?
Well, because they're going to, I've already downloaded and patched mine, and it's really pretty. It's really neat. It's fun. It's good level design. Even new assets, it seems like, at least.
Yeah. So Nintendo has not gone after a lot of ROM hacks. I think maybe ROM hacks are very, very hard for them to get taken down versus someone using Nintendo IP in an original game, which is clearly like a copyright violation. But like, I sort of view it like, I can take a book and like cross out certain words, and that's not a copyright violation, right? Or any notes or something. Like, it's kind of the same concept. So maybe Nintendo Legal hasn't figured out the correct way to sue people out doing ROM hacks.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're trying. But I suggest everyone check this out. I mean, if you're looking for a new old Mario game, you even get a Tanuki suit in this. That's...
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like the Super Mario 3D Land. On Wii U and the 3DS.
Yeah, and obviously it's free.
So more out of order translation news. Ni no Kuni DS version now has an English patch.
So have you heard of this game?
I have heard of it, and I think I have even listened to the soundtrack because I was curious about it. But I obviously haven't played it. It looks like it's like a hybrid, anime kind of card battler game, maybe?
I don't think card battler. Maybe. I could be wrong. But so my buddy Rick, shout out to Rick, he told me about this story. He's all about it. He says it's great. It's a translation, but you still need the English manual, which there's a PDF you could download.
Okay.
And the big deal about this game is that it's available in English and has been on PS3 for a long time, but the DS version is completely different, and I guess the superior version, because from the videos I looked at, the way you do your magic spells in this is you draw kind of little runic characters. So yeah, pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it looks like a good game.
And I trust this guy. He has good taste in games, and he's all about it.
So in news that is both surprising and also kind of not surprising, Just Dance 2020 sold better on the original Nintendo Wii than on the PS4 or Xbox One in its opening week.
Not shocked at all.
Now, this is off the UK charts, but I can't imagine the UK charts look different than the US charts other than just quantity.
Yeah. It's not shocking, but at the same time, it's insane that, I mean, there's got to be people that just keep their Wiis just to get this game every year.
Well, yeah, I think there's some of that. I mean, I think it's a game that you're going to buy. Like, this is the perfect time of year to release it because people are planning things, families going to be over for Thanksgiving, or we're going to have a Christmas party, or we're going to have a New Year's party. And if you have kids, Just Dance is a pretty cheap way to entertain them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a Wii hooked up somewhere, if I, for whatever reason, my kids were like, oh man, I really want Just Dance because I want the new... we could do a bonus track where I name artists and songs on Just Dance 2020 and you see if you could name any, recognize any of them.
Yeah,
or mix in some fictional ones.
That's what I was going to say, real or fake, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who's on these, really. They usually include, a couple throwback songs, I guess. So, you'll get, Rock Lobster or something on there.
I recognize a name or two on this, but that's...
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for the site to load here. Just Dance 2020 key features. Okay, hold on.
Cardi B, Ed Sheeran, Justin Bieber.
They have, let's see, Baby Shark. I think I've heard of that. Blackpink, never heard of it. Old Town Road, I've heard of. Taki Taki by DJ Snake.
No.
The Time by Black Eyed Peas. Nice thing is Black Eyed Peas, you always know when you listen to a Black Eyed Peas song because the song will contain the words Black Eyed Peas at least once. Yeah, I'm just looking around, man. Sushi by Mark and Kermit. Vodo Vorat by the XS Project.
Now, yeah, what? So this is a Ubisoft game. What tier of programmer do you think they have working on this?
Zero. It's the same engine. They make no changes to the game engine at all.
They just throw in the new songs and
maybe do some. They have to film the actors,
mm-hmm.
the dancers. But they don't change. There's no possible way they do any work on the game engine because there wouldn't be a Wii version. I mean, it's just literally take the code from the last Wii engine, Wii game, and just slap new songs and animations into it.
It's probably like what they give the summer intern to do.
Yeah. So this is just printing money for them. I mean, good for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really. So yeah, I'm just including that because it's such a fun story,
mm-hmm.
and there's probably also a little bit of collectors involved there too. I'm half tempted to buy it just because I know it's the last Wii game ever. So
yeah, and there's some completists out there that need the entire Wii collection.
Yeah, I don't need that, but I think it's kind of neat to have the last game for the system.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
I have tracked down the last games for many other systems. Some of them, though, are way too expensive. And last news story, 8-Bit DO turns the NES gamepad into a mouse.
So, for people who aren't looking at this right now, it is a very non-ergonomical mouse with that has the color palette of an NES US controller and 2 buttons on the top and the D-pad on the side. Cool, I guess. It's wireless.
It looks really uncomfortable.
Yes, and it says that in this article. Like, it's not great to use.
Yeah, you would use it on, Raspberry Pi that you occasionally have to go on and do some stuff on. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
My Raspberry Pi that I run Pi-hole on, it would be kind of useful for that. Once a month, I have to go in and click update on it or something. I realize I can do it through the web browser.
It's compatible with the Switch.
Oh, well, that's great.
So I know what you're getting for Christmas now.
I can't wait to play Breath of the Wild with that thing.
Yeah.
That seems like a fun experience.
And that is our short news week.
Yes. So now we're going to jump to an interview with David Craddock, who just wrote a book called Arcade Perfect. We've mentioned it on the show before, but now we get to find out a lot more about the book and talk quite a bit about some of our favorite arcade ports. All right. So we are talking to David Craddock, who just wrote a book called Arcade Perfect, which is about the history of arcade ports. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, guys. How are you?
Oh, doing all right. I'm really fascinated by this because I think, like a lot of gamers, I got into home consoles because I wanted arcade ports.
Yes. Yeah, same with me. I remember seeing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the first time at an arcade when I was, I guess, 7 or 8, and when that came to the NES, that just blew my mind, the idea that I could play my favorite arcade game at home. And I'm sure my mom, I don't remember when I got it, but I'm sure she was more than willing because I had one less reason to pester her for quarters whenever we would go to the mall.
Yeah, so I think I guess I must be a little bit older because, like, for me, it was Donkey Kong.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Donkey Kong in the grocery store because that was back when you had video games in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And all I wanted that Christmas was Donkey Kong. And what I was referring to was like a Coleco Donkey Kong. That's what I thought I was gonna get. I lucked out though, and instead we got an Intellivision with Donkey Kong, which I at the time thought was perfect.
Right.
All right. But Donkey Kong was a real interesting story for the port.
Yeah, it really does. One of my objectives with this book was to talk to as many different developers spanning as many different generations of console and PC hardware as possible. And I was lucky enough to get an hour or so to pick Gary Kitchen's brain about the 2600 port of Donkey Kong that Coleco contracted him to do. And Gary that guy's a heck of a raconteur. He had a lot of great stories to tell, specifically about how, as anyone who played the 2600 version, which is pretty infamous, knows, he focused a lot on that first level. And one of his big hurdles was, okay, how do I make the ramps slanted, which was something that the 2600 really was not built to do out of the box. He had to kind of play with the TV adapter settings and code a lot to make that happen.
Yeah. It's just an impossible task if you obviously if your background is programming, trying to even get your head around how you would do something like that is painful.
And in assembly, no less. I have a background in programming as well, and the idea of, when I learned BASIC and then moved on to Pascal and did some assembly in college, but really kind of came into my own in C and C++. And, like years ago, John Carmack released the source code for Wolfenstein 3 and Doom. And I remember cracking open Doom and looking at things like structures in C and saying, okay, I get this. And then every now and then he'll just like kind of go seamlessly into assembly. And that's kind of where I lost the thread.
Yeah, I've looked at that code. Yeah, it's all to do, more complex math operations and things that are just really mind-blowing. And I find assembly to be very, very simple. It's really hard to think about sometimes.
It is, because it seems like, with high-level languages like C, you can kind of... A lot of the statements and definitions and structures, like actual structures and for loops, are kind of broad. But with assembly, you have to think of every little step and work that out. I think that's where the difficulty comes in, is the nuance of it.
So just like sticking with the 2600, so you cover quite a few 2600 ports. Like just in your interviews with the developers and in the research, which one do you think was the most technically complex?
Donkey Kong for sure. Pac-Man, I also talked to Todd Fry about Pac-Man on the 2600, and the interesting thing there was that game was really, I don't want to say no less technically complex, because Pac-Man, at least visually, is a lot simpler game than Donkey Kong with the slanted ramps. I mean, with Pac-Man, you take a maze, draw one side, and then mirror it. Boom, you got it. But, Todd's approach was to abstract the game. This was back in the day before developers really grasped how important it was to get that quote-unquote arcade perfect port to consumers. And so he kind of took something that was very complex and simplified it. And I know that in recent years, retro gaming fans, which, we seem to be, we are a legion. There are more than dozens of us now, year over year, but we've softened on him a bit, because now we understand more of the technical hurdles that he had to jump. But I kind of appreciated his point of view that, he knew the 2600 had no chance of creating an arcade perfect port, so he abstracted it and zeroed in on the elements of Pac-Man that he felt were most important. I thought that was very novel and pragmatic of him.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really fun port. I feel like I'm in the minority who thinks the original 2600 Pac-Man is a fun game, but...
I do as well, and it's actually kind of a running theme throughout my Arcade Perfect book. One point I try to make is that... Actually, I don't say this explicitly, but I feel like around the era of PlayStation, and then even more so around Dreamcast, when we were getting arcade perfect ports and then some, games like Street Fighter Alpha and Soul Calibur, which were identical except for extra modes, which made them arguably better than the arcade versions. I feel like the abstractions that we got were, in a way, a lot more fun. Going back to the Ninja Turtles arcade game on NES, the sprites were smaller, but the cool thing was the levels were twice as long. There were new stages, there were new bosses, there were new cutscenes, and we used the term lightly, but as a kid, I could appreciate that this was the same but still different, and different enough that it still held my interest even after having played the arcade game for so long. I mean, now you fire up an arcade ROM, or maybe pick up one of the new cabinets the Arcade 1-Up just put out, and you can beat that game in like 20 minutes if you don't have to pump quarters into it. But the NES port, they kind of slowed the pace, and by doubling the length of each level, they made it feel like a meatier game than most arcade ports were, which, let's face it, most arcade ports you can finish within an hour if you know what you're doing. Also,
sometimes they made them better in different ways, like Legendary Wings or Rygar or Contra. Actually, they don't look better, but they play better and they're more fun at home. Almost a different game, Like they got to rethink it.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think Contra is arguably one of those games where the NES port is head and shoulders better than the arcade game. Like I appreciate that Konami, I believe they included both in the recent Contra collection, but for me, it's the NES port all day, every day.
Yeah. I mean, part of it, and this is going back to TMNT, is you're taking a game that you were charging people 25 cents for, and now you're putting it in a $50 cartridge. So it's like there had better be more content than there is in the arcade game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know people are so divided on that arcade port, specifically TMNT2, but again, as a kid, even to this day, it's one of my favorite arcade ports, just because it brought something different to the table.
Yeah. So you talked about, we'll stick with that kind of same time period. Like you talked about Mortal Kombat being a big inspiration for the book. What, just based on, again, I don't want you to like give away everything that's in the book. We want people to go buy the book, of course. But
right.
Why do you think there was such disparity in the quality of ports for Mortal Kombat?
Well, I think it really had to do with a few things. The Mortal Kombat chapter especially goes into a lot of the cultural differences surrounding the NES versus the Sega Genesis. Everyone around that time, video game violence was becoming a bigger issue. So Sega and Nintendo were united in agreeing that, yes, okay, we should censor this game, but Sega also realized, if we let our developer, Probe, sneak in a secret blood code, that will give us an advantage in sales. Because, you know, one of the whole points of the Genesis, one of its marketing lines was, this is for the big kids, you know. The second thing was, as I discussed in the Mortal Kombat chapter again, at Sculptured Software working on the SNES version, they, you know, that team was led by kind of a cowboy programmer who thought he could do an arcade perfect port, and he could not. And it took 2 or 3 months for him to kind of admit this. And, you know, the thing about arcade ports is they were so important to a lot of publishers' bottom line, and yet you wouldn't know it to listen to internal conversations and read internal memos, because the object was just put poop in a bag, it will sell no matter what. And, you know, in Mortal Kombat's case, Donkey Kong case, Pac-Man's case, they had, like, you know, 6 to 9 months to just throw something together and get it out the door so they could make that money. And what happened with Mortal Kombat on the SNES was, you know, they had to get rid of this programmer. A team of programmers had to come in, perform triage, and shore up the game as much as they could. And there were casualties. You know, I love the the aesthetic of the SNES port of Mortal Kombat. I think audio, or aurally and visually, it's very, very close to the arcade. Certainly has more sound samples than the Genesis, but the controls are laggy to the point of being completely irresponsive in some cases, whereas the Genesis version is very snappy. And there's another case kind of going back to what we were talking about, you know, kind of praising a lot of the differences in ports. The Genesis version is grainier than the arcade version, but I always felt as a kid who was, you know, trying to be dark and edgy and prefer Mortal Kombat over Street Fighter, that grainy, gritty look kind of added to Mortal Kombat's mystique on the Genesis.
Yeah, you know, the comments you just made there about them, you know, treating these ports kind of badly, something just clicked for me. Like, this, I never remember this being the case for the Street Fighter ports. Like, I'm having a hard time thinking of a Street Fighter port that was really bad. And now it's sort of connecting for me, like, oh, well, that's because Capcom was both an arcade developer and a home console developer.
You know, did you ever play a Street Fighter 2 port on any PC?
Yes. Hold on. I might even have one.
So they are almost uniform. Okay, so that's the exception. I'm talking like vanilla Street Fighter 2 from like 91 to 93.
Yeah. So because this is a podcast, I'll just note I pulled out Super Street Fighter 2 for Capcom. This was a kind of mid-90s release.
And that was a great port. I had Super Street Fighter 2, not Super 2 Turbo on PC. But yeah, Super 2 on PC was great. Street Fighter 2 Vanilla was not. If you're ever curious, you know, look up a YouTube video or maybe dig around and try it yourself through other means. But this game, I remember getting it for DOS on my grandma's, I think she had a 386 computer. And, you know, I didn't have a Super Nintendo at the time, but I thought, well, you know, I couldn't articulate this, but I knew that PCs had more horsepower than consoles, so I figured, well, this version should be arcade perfect. No, not at all. The characters jump like they're fighting on the moon, and instead of 6 input buttons, there were 2. Yeah, like punch was spacebar, enter, or
keyboard, yeah.
yeah, return was kick, and if you wanted to do, say, a crouching roundhouse kick, you had to hold down, then quickly hold up and press and mash on enter. And by holding that combination of keys, you would do a sweep. Yeah, it was terrible. I believe I wasn't able to. I actually made contact with some of the folks who worked on the DOS and Amiga versions. One was a port of the other, and they both declined to talk. I think they were afraid I was going to rake them through the coals, which was not the case at all. What my thesis of this book was, porting games to old hardware was really, really hard, and I wanted to find people who would help me illustrate that. They certainly could have. But yeah, not to denigrate them, but PC ports of Street Fighter 2, I would say before Super Turbo or Super 2 on DOS, were really rough, really rough.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I guess I wouldn't have expected that either. Although I have played some really, I mean, not things you've talked about yet, but I mean, I played some PC ports that were pretty awful, and I played a few that were pretty good.
Yeah, it really seems like PC games didn't start to be taken seriously, at least anecdotally, until Doom. Like, Wolfenstein 3D was cool, but Doom kind of showed people, like, kind of kicked down the doors for PC games and for developers to say, you know, if we devote resources, we can make something that's even better than the arcade or consoles.
Unless you're in Europe. They're all...
Right.
Well, yeah, huge difference there. Yeah, I wonder how much of that is just the hardware differences, you know, that the developers, you know, you're not writing arcade games on x86. Yeah. So now when you're porting it to a completely different platform. And I just wonder if some developers just didn't translate well.
I mean, there were so many variables. Like one thing I discuss in the book is that a lot of these developers in charge of ports were given no access to art or audio assets. They didn't have source code. And also, again, something that kind of belies the importance of arcade ports to publishers was that oftentimes novice programmers were assigned to these big names like Mortal Kombat, like Street Fighter, like Double Dragon, and it's kind of incredible to think that a lot of people cut their teeth on projects that should have been assigned to the best programmer on staff, but in fact it was the opposite. They were usually given to the new guy, and while everyone else worked on original IP.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I know you talked about Mortal Monday a little bit in the book, or at least I've been told that came up. Then
yes,
how Mortal Kombat. One of the things I thought about Mortal Kombat, how it kind of changed the industry, was it sort of made like pre-orders a thing. In game stores, they weren't, sort of anecdotally speaking, of course, not what they are today, where like GameStop, you're almost expected to pre-order everything.
Yeah, and also I remember, especially for WWE games a few years ago, and for others as well, GameStop, Target, Walmart, everyone would have a different pre-order bonus that you couldn't get unless you pre-ordered at that store. And I'm thinking, like, I'm not buying 4 copies of this $60 game just to get different wrestlers. But I think Sonic 2, which came out on Sonic Tuesday, was the first video game to have a pre-order date. But that was kind of like Wolfenstein 3D. It was this experiment, and then Mortal Monday was the one where Acclaim poured $10 million into advertising September 13th, 1993 as the day. And it seems like from there, publishers were like, okay, yeah, this works, and we can pre-sell a lot of games. Let's start to plan this stuff out.
Yeah, so you can't see it on camera, but behind me, I have a banner from the Sonic 2 pre-order event hanging up, because I was like 17 working at a game store when that was going on. And back then, there wasn't eBay. So if you said, hey, boss, can I just take home a bunch of signs and junk? They're like, yeah, whatever. Nobody cares.
My favorite little trinket of yours in the background, I'm looking just above your head in the back corner, is Link from Ocarina of Time, which is one of my favorite games ever. Yeah, that's awesome. You have a lot of cool stuff back there.
Yeah, so that's a kite, and that I got that literally for 25 cents at a yard sale. So. Oh,
that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I only worked at the game store till like 95, 96, so I don't have any cool game store merchandise beyond that. Then I went to college and, got a real job and all that fun stuff.
Right.
The other thing that Sega arcade ports did is they actually changed the hardware, because like the Genesis didn't have 6-button controllers until people wanted to play Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat on it. Are there like other cases that you came across? Because I was actually this is more my own knowledge. Like, are there other cases you came across where hardware manufacturers actually changed their plans or introduced new peripherals because of arcade ports?
Sometimes introducing, but also some publishers would use an arcade port as a means to push a piece of pre-existing hardware. I know that, talking to Paul Carruthers, who, before he ported Mortal Kombat, to Genesis, he ported T2, the arcade game. And, for the Genesis or Mega Drive port, publisher, Sega was saying, hey, definitely make this compatible with our Zapper, because we know Nintendo's over there going to, promote the Super Scope 6 compatibility with their version. And then let's see, who was it? David Leitch did the Game Gear port, and he said, fortunately, I had no light gun to worry about with the Game Gear. But then what Sega wanted was they wanted him to kind of reverse engineer his Game Gear port and put it on the Master System. And he said, like, for a while they were considering, we want a light gun version of this as well. And that was pretty tricky for him because, by that time, the Master System was really only still being sold, everywhere outside of North America, really, where it didn't do that well. So, I can't think of a lot of instances, and I know there are some, but I can't think of anywhere a port was used to introduce hardware, but definitely, publishers wanted to throw their weight behind any peripherals they had lying around that weren't really seeing heavy usage.
Oh, why didn't I think of it? Lethal Enforcers. It's the most obvious example ever.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Of
course, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, and I'm sure Sega tried to... The Team Player, like Sega's Team Player, I think was meant more for sports games than for arcade ports. But was used... I guess Gauntlet 4 is not... I don't know if you call that an arcade port or not. That's sort of a weird sequel to Arcade Game thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one was, I can't remember what it was called, but there was this octagon type ring for the Genesis that you could stand in. I remember seeing ads for playing Mortal Kombat with it. You'd actually punch and kick and
it didn't work like that. It was called the Activator.
No, the Activator.
I know this again is from working retail at that time, from working at a game store back then. We had the Activator. We might ever have only sold one. It was such a huge box we couldn't put it on it wouldn't fit on our shelves. We had to put it on a high shelf where Shaquille O'Neal couldn't even reach it, and it didn't work. Like the commercials, I know the guy was punching and then the character on the screen was punching, but that's not how it worked. It had these 8 octagons, and then it could detect motion either high or low above any of those 8 sensor bars. So they mapped it up would be kick low, and down would be kick back, and A would be maybe punch high, or I guess kick high if you're in really great shape. So to do Mortal Kombat, to jump in Mortal Kombat, it's not like you jumped and a scorpion jumped or whatever, right? You were doing weird, unnatural twister movements to do anything with that.
That's both good and bad to know. I guess it crushes my childhood for a little bit. But I remember looking at magazine ads for the Activator and thinking oh man, this is the future. But now, now as an adult, I'm thinking, wow, the last thing I want to do when I'm done, I'm a full-time writer. The last thing I want to do when I'm done writing is jump and kick and punch and walk around. I want to sit down with a controller, just like in the good old days. So I guess not much has changed in that regard.
So you didn't buy the Microsoft Kinect either, then? I assume.
No, I did not. I remember my mom. I lived out of state at the time, and she was like, "I'm getting one for your sister for Christmas. I'll get one for you." I'm like, honestly, Mom, we'll just FaceTime. I don't want to connect in my living room. It was also weird too because I was living just south of San Francisco, paying a ridiculous rent for a pretty small apartment. I'm thinking I don't even think I could fit a Kinect in here. I'd be pressed up against the lens. So let's just stick with the phone.
So you're full-time writing now, and I gotta say that you wrote 2 of my favorite books, Stay a While and Listen and Dungeon Hacks. If any of our listeners haven't heard about those books, look them up. I personally got them on Audible, and I've listened to them at least twice. So I just want to say thank you. Those are great. 2 questions. Any chance this will be an audiobook? And do you have any other books on the horizon?
Yes, Arcade Perfect will be an audiobook. It's funny you should mention Stay While and Listen, because right now I'm working toward the release of Stay While and Listen 2. The Kindle edition will be, what is that? December 10th. Kickstarter backers actually have it now, and they've been reading it. And then once that's squared away, I will be turning my attention to contracting. Well, last time I went through, who was it? Not Audible. Audiobooks.com. There's something now, I think Novel Audio. They contacted me and floated a contract for the audiobooks for both those. I helped cast Mike Rylander, who narrated Dungeon Hacks and Stay While and Listen. I thought he did a fantastic job. Yeah. Ideally, he really did, and ideally he'd do Stay While and Listen to and maybe Arcade Perfect as well, but that's something for post-Christmas David to think about, I guess.
What's Stay a While and Listen to? What do you focus on in that one?
Stay While and Listen to picks up right where the first one left off, which is the Blizzard North team kind of raising their gold master copy of Diablo High and then going home to sleep. And from there I move into Hellfire and kind of the Hellfire and Brimstone that kicked up around that, because that was an expansion pack that neither Blizzard wanted to happen. They were kind of drag kicking, streaming into the making of StarCraft and Diablo 2, and then, sadly for me, kind of the downward spiral of Blizzard North after Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction in 2001. Stay While Listen 2 goes until the summer of 2003, when the parent company kind of called the bluff of Blizzard North's founders, Dave Brevik and Max Eric Schaefer, and said, all right, you guys are out, and we're going to gut your company, kind of clean house, and see who we're going to keep and who's going to move forward onto Diablo 3 from there.
Yeah, fantastic books. So, yeah, I'm a fan.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a lot of range covering like roguelikes to arcade ports. Just completely different genres. Yeah. But that's the thing about games. People can have, can like 5 or 6 different genres.
Yeah, I try to I look for angles on stories that haven't really been either told at all or are told in full. When I was interviewing people for Stay While and Listen, Dave Brevik said he got obsessed with roguelikes, and I said, well, maybe I'll track down the co-creators of Rogue and get like a few quotes just to kind of establish some background for Diablo. And then the stories were so interesting, I thought, well, this kind of warrants a book in and of itself, and that's where Dungeon Hacks came from. And then, for arcade ports, it's funny now because there are a lot of quote-unquote historians on YouTube who say, like, this is my Mortal Kombat retrospective, and I kind of settle in, make some popcorn thinking, oh, this is going to be really informative. Really, it ends up being like, this is my history with Mortal Kombat. I played it on Genesis, I liked it a lot, and the fatalities were cool. Like, okay, that's fine, but it's not really a retrospective, so I decided, I loved arcade ports growing up. They were often more of the decision makers in determining which console I would beg my parents for as a kid, even more so than first party games like Mario or Sonic. And so I just decided to write a book about those as well.
Yeah, I mean, and there are systems like I always call out the Atari 7800 as being a system that is really great for arcade ports.
Yeah.
So, were there any games you really wanted to cover but couldn't, either because you couldn't find developers or just because of space constraints?
Language barriers were an issue. I would love to have tracked down the developers of the Ninja Turtles arcade game for the NES and actually talk with them, because this was back in the day when Japanese publishers such as Nintendo, Capcom, and Konami would oftentimes use pseudonyms for their developers because they were afraid of poaching. They didn't want anyone to get a big head and negotiate higher salaries, so they're really hard to find. I also really wanted to dig more into the Neo Geo, but I just talked about Stay While and Listen 2, so I can say that I'm a big fan of sequels. So, I probably dig more into other systems in an Arcade Perfect 2 or, whatever I decide to call it whenever it happens.
So, if you do a sequel, may I humbly request Dragon's Lair?
Oh yes, yeah, that's a good one. That's one I wanted to get into and didn't have time.
Yeah, because there are some ports of that that are just like there's a port of it on Game Boy that I still cannot believe they pulled off.
Yeah, on floppy disk.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it absolutely. I was saying, all right. So again, it is Arcade Perfect, and people can get that on Amazon. Anywhere else, or is it strictly Amazon?
It should be in bookstores as well, but Amazon and paperback and on Kindle and. One day on an Audible.com subscription near you.
I can't wait.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This was really great.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right. So again, Arcade Perfect. Go out to Amazon, get a copy. Like, don't wait for this to show up in a game book bundle.
Yeah. And also his other books too. I can't recommend them enough. I've listened to both his other books at least twice, so that's how good they are. So yeah, and I think it's game club time.
Yeah.
So mine's listed first, so I guess I'll go first. I did a game, very rare game, Super Mario World, and so my history with this is, I think, a bit unique. I got the Super Nintendo a bit late, and my buddy who I was hanging out with a lot at the time got it with Super Mario World, and he was all about it, and I tried it, and I just kept saying, like, well, I'll just wait till Super Mario 4 comes out. This isn't that great. And then, not realizing that I was already playing it. So I just kind of wrote it off, and ever since I realized my mistake, and it's some people's all-time favorite game, I never really got into it, so I wanted to put it here and really give it a go, and I'm sorry to say I like Super Mario 3 better. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this game for me. I had fun playing it. It's definitely one of the more, out of the first many Mario games, I'd say this is probably the most difficult, even with the Warp Worlds, or I guess Star World Warp. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology. Someone's probably screaming at the radio. I don't know. I did not complete it simply because of a time thing. I wanted to not warp around or skip around, so I wanted to get all the way through, and just didn't have time. I'm not going to give up on it. And it's free on Switch right now, so why not? You know what I mean? Yeah, everything I'm saying, everybody already knows if you're listening to this podcast. You know, great music, great animation, perfect gameplay, but for some reason, Super Mario Brothers 3 is still better for me.
Yeah, that's where I've been stuck on this game for a long time, too. This has been kind of like a game I've put off playing. I've had an original cart for 20 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. And when they released some revision of the 3DS, one of the many 3DS revisions, there was one that included Super Mario World built in. And that must have been the new 3DS, because I bought it because it's new, right? It's the new 3DS. It's somehow better than previous 3DSs. And like, hey, and as a bonus, I finally will just sit down and play some Mario World. And I gotta tell you, I played about 2 stages in and quit.
It doesn't hold you, right?
It doesn't, yeah. And I think knowing that it's a game that came out after Mario 3 just makes me like crazy. Because it just, I was expecting something Mario 3 level, and I didn't get it. So then I tried it again on the Super Nintendo Classic. I've got that hooked up right now. And tried it again and still did not take more time. I mean, do you have to play it do I got to get 4 or 5 levels in?
Yeah, listeners, please write in. Please be nice, because it's all just opinion. It's just games. No one cares. But let us know what we're missing. If we're here to learn too.
But the difference is Super Mario 3D World, which I mentioned a little bit ago. That took right away. First stage of that game, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is fun. Yeah, and it's definitely not. I still think Mario 3 is a better game, but it was fun. I played all the way through it, and I just don't know how to put it. Super Mario World has just never ever clicked for me.
One good thing that came out of this, again, there's nothing wrong with Super Mario World. So I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm just saying not as good, didn't hold my attention because of that, So I pulled out the Mario All-Stars and played for the first time the 16-bit version of Super Mario Brothers 3. And wow, that's a great version.
Yeah, it's a Mario 3 where you can actually play through all 8 worlds because it has this thing called save.
Yes.
So if you want to do I'm going to play through every level of the game run, you can do it without having to blow your entire weekend sitting on the couch.
Yeah, I used to actually pause it and turn the TV off, but leave the Nintendo on, and then just leave a piece of paper on it so my mom wouldn't see the light on the Nintendo on and turn it off, thinking it was a mistake, while I'm at school.
Nice.
Of course, sweating bullets the whole time I'm at school, but. So yeah, that's nice. Super Mario Brothers 3. I mean, Super Mario World.
Yeah, I just I don't know, man. There are so many other platformers I'd rather play, and then even of that era. I mean, I would rather play Bonk's Revenge than Super Mario World easily.
Yep. I that's one of my favorite games ever.
Yeah, Sonic CD, I'd play that. Sonic 2. Yeah, sorry to have a bummer of a game that is a bummer for us to talk about. I'm sure, it's a great game. I'm not denying the...
It's many people's all-time favorite game, or at least all-time favorite platformer. So I don't, I'm not dumping on it. It's fine. Anyway.
Yeah.
What was your game?
Since we were talking about arcade ports, why don't we talk about one more? Arch Rivals. So... This was almost like the prototype for NBA Jam. It's a 2-on-2 basketball game, and you've got punching, just like NBA Jam. So your high school rivals, although the players all look like they're in their 20s. And, there's 3 or 4 different teams, and they have kind of like different attributes, good shooter, good rebounder, good puncher, whatever. And you can put together your team. I usually do one where it's like Mohawk, like who's like kind of the tough guy, and then the dude in the glasses who's like the good 3-point shooter. Usually I do something like that.
What ports did you play?
So I played the arcade collection that's on PSP. It's actually I think I have an arcade collection sitting right here next to me that's also on PS2.
Yep.
But I always default to the PSP on this game. I don't know why. And then there's a Sega Genesis port that's pretty close. But you can just get the game, on an arcade collection. You don't have to. I think it's Arcade Treasures 2. Let me see if I can wedge it out here. I can't read. Sorry. Yes, Midway Arcade Treasures 2 has this, and it's a perfect version, and you don't have to worry about using a lot of quarters. It still makes you insert quarters, between quarters, but obviously they are now virtual quarters.
That's a good thing to know. It's a timed game, like you don't die or anything. It's just you run out of time.
Right. So if you're getting blown out or something, then you quit.
Yeah, you just walk away.
Yeah, but it plays a lot like NBA Jam because of the physicality and the lack of fouls. Even mechanically, it kind of feels a little bit like NBA Jam. But it's kind of easy because the computer doesn't hit back all that much. So, you can pretty much like have your AI person take a shot, and then you just punch the other 2 players while they're standing around waiting for the rebound. And then if your player misses, you get the rebound and then can dunk it. Mm-hmm. And of course, if your opponent's going up for a shot, you can punch them while they're in the air. If you just get really, really liberal with the punch button, you will. You're going to win by 20 points every time.
I want to note that this is, speaking of punching, this is designed by Brian Collin from Downers Grove, Illinois, and he also designed the 2 Rampage games, which have the exact same punch animation.
Yep. Yeah. Great. This guy, Brian Collin, is at Midwest Gaming Classic every year, it seems. It's a short drive for him, right? Mm-hmm. And he did a number of really classic games. He worked on a lot of... it's a wide range. He worked on Discs of Tron.
Great game.
Obviously, Arch Rivals and Rampage. And I want to say Xenophobe was one of his too. Xenophobe, he has the same animation really as Rampage.
Well, hey, programmers like to reuse code, right?
Hey, why not? Why not? So yeah, I definitely recommend this game.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Collin is in the White Castle Hall of Fame. How do you get into the White Castle Hall of Fame?
I feel like I need to be in that. I feel like I can. That's my jam. What do you do for that?
Their devotion is unmatched, and their love for sliders has earned them a place in these hallowed halls. I got to find his entry and find out what he did to get accepted. Oh, these are the 2008 ones.
Did I just find my calling? Is it happening right now on this podcast?
Maybe. They have a couple of other, so these guys like retro games because, let me see here. Yeah, there's one of these guys, inductees, is talking about Qbert. He didn't work on Qbert. But this is people who I guess eat a lot of White Castle, and then you share your story about how much you love White Castle.
Did we just find a sponsor?
I don't particularly care for White Castle.
No, neither do I.
There's only
it's funny.
There's only one time White Castle comes in handy, if you're
7 or 8 beers in.
No, just if
because some gut problems.
Yeah, kind of, things aren't moving for you, if you know what I'm saying. So Brian Collin got introduced while working for it looks like a game developer, and as you've already guessed, design video games, blah blah blah, 3D Game Engine. These are long inductions. Seems like maybe for making a virtual White Castle in a game.
Oh. Huh. Is there one maybe in one of the Rampage games or something?
No, this is from 2005, and it's from some game studio I've never heard of. So probably some mobile game or some PC, small game. No, 2005 it couldn't be a mobile game. All right, so
yeah. So I played.
Do you want to announce what our next games are going to be, and then do listener feedback, or other way around?
Let's do listener feedback.
Okay. What's the email address, by the way, if people want?
Yes, if you want to write in, please write in email@retrogameclub.net. That is email@retrogameclub.net. And Joe writes in, and he says he's catching up on a lot of topics and or a lot of episodes. And a while ago we did a article about a dentist who spent $1 million or more on starting his retro arcade collection or game collection. And that this is actually a PR campaign from Heritage Auctions, who is just getting into the retro gaming collection bubble and are jacking up the prices. And then, which is even more, it makes the whole story even more enraging. And that for our PC Components episode, he really misses the 3D effects cards. He liked how they were just numbered like Voodoo 1, 2, and 3, and nowadays cards just have random numbers, and it's hard to figure out what's good and what's bad. And I couldn't agree more. On the on Ghostbusters, he really liked the Sega Master System version. He played a ton with his brother. It was really frustrating, so his brother took the cartridge and threw it across the room after Gozer beat them for the umpteenth time. And he still has that cracked cartridge. The real Ghostbusters arcade game was okay, but it didn't have enough real Ghostbusters element in it. It seemed like it was just kind of a gimmick for that, the rotary joystick. And yeah, Luigi's Mansion still looks great to this day. Probably one of the closest it got to, a real 3D Ghostbusters game. I couldn't agree more. And he beat it once and has no desire to revisit it, but thanks, Joe, for writing in.
All right. Sorry, I was looking at the Heritage Auctions website. I can't find any video games on there. So I believe that theory. I also believe that they are not good at listing video games on their site. So let's see. Jess writes in. First email since June 1st. So there you go, because he listens on his commute, which, there you go. So by the time you get to a computer, obviously you forgot what you want to write about.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to talk about Ghidra, and it had an interesting thought about how there's a lot of retro games that you hear can't be ported because the source code is lost. And couldn't somebody now just start decompiling those games to reverse engineer them? Which, they could have in the past as well. I mean, there are other decompilers. This one, the advantage is now this is free and more accessible. That's kind of the big deal. But yeah, the problem is you can the thing with Ghidra that's kind of neat is it does develop C pseudocode for what it, so it decompiles stuff down to assembler and then gives you C sort of equivalent C code to that assembler code. So you could make a full game listing out of it. It takes a lot of time. I mean, you have to find a game you were really passionate about.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I've only tried to decompile things, a handful of times in my life, and I think the last time was probably back in the late 90s. That anytime I've decompiled something, and then I don't change anything, and I just try to compile, it never works.
Yeah, when you're doing
it never. Okay.
Yeah, that's really all there is. Sorry. Just don't change anything, because there might be a checksum or something that you messed up. And then he's got some rapid fire questions for us. Responses, I should say. Rapid fire thoughts on the past episodes, and then some questions for us. I'm terrible at reading stuff. This was always my biggest phobia in school, when teacher would call on you to read aloud. Restar. Big fan of the graphics and music in the game, but the difficulty starts to really ramp up around the music-based world. I did not make it that far, so that's good to know. F-Zero, also big fan of the graphics and music, but also a little bit too difficult. Ninja Gaiden, didn't own it, but played it at a friend's house all the time. because back then ninjas were just the coolest thing.
Still now.
And also just how weird and like how very different it is between the like arcade version and NES version. We should have asked about Ninja Gaiden.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's another one where the ports are all over the place. California Games Paperboy and TNC Surf Designs. I just want to say I'm very nostalgic for those games, but never owned them, but did rent them all. Dreamcast SDKs seems like an interesting topic. Wolfenstein 3D, his dad had it on his computer and it blew him away. He just spent $10 at Good Old Games to get it plus Spear of Destiny. Nice. And thank you for telling me about Chocolate Doom. I mean that both sincerely and sarcastically. Right, because it's going to become a big time waster now. Randy from Nerd Out couldn't tell who was interviewing who, but it was still fun. And that's true. He had as many questions for us, I think, as we did for them.
Yeah, it was fun.
But staying on that, he apparently collected Monster in My Pocket when they were a thing. So somewhere down in his basement, he has a box of Monster in My Pocket, and first learned what a Kraken was because of them. Also wanted to mention the 3D Blaster as a 90s PC component, which was, I think, their video card. And I remember the 3D Blaster.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think I owned one. And then he has a question for us, and there's a long story behind it. Once as a kid, when we were on vacation, my brothers and I met a local kid who tried to tell us about a game called Mario 64, and it was out in China. He probably meant Japan, but I distinctly remember he said China. We laughed because we thought 64 was the sequel number. Super Mario Bros. 2, 3, now all the way up to 64. We mocked the idea with jokes about how old Mario must be in the new game. Like, is he using a walker or cane? So his question to us is, has there ever been a video game rumor that you found too incredulous to believe but turned out to be true, or a rumor that you believed must be true but then turned out to be completely false?
Well, we both have a few answers for this. Sonic 3's music was composed by Michael Jackson. There's no way that was true. And then, yeah.
But it is true.
Yes. And then a Nintendo PlayStation actually existing out in the wild, and that one would turn up. I just thought they were just all destroyed or never even got... I didn't even think they got that far, you know? And that anyone actually owned a Neo Geo AES back in the day. I still don't know if that's true.
So I believed that a Nintendo PlayStation prototype probably existed somewhere. Mm-hmm. I was shocked that it actually was called PlayStation, one word. Because I thought all the rumors were it was PlayStation, 2 words. And that's why for like a little while I was skeptical that it was real. I'm still a little skeptical because of that. But the ones I wrote down, so one was a schoolyard one. The Bikini Metroid ending. I heard kids talk about that and said, well, that can't possibly be true. And
made you want to beat the game.
Well, you have to beat it fast. It's not just beat the game, right? It's do it in under, 30 minutes or something. And then the rumor that turned out to be false, blah, 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 blah. Sega Genesis 32X combo. So there were I know there was an April Fool's prank at some point about it, but there were rumors back in the day, in 95, that there was going to be a Sega hardware revision that was like Sega Genesis plus 32X, and that just seemed, why wouldn't that be a real thing?
Yeah. I would love one of those.
Yeah, I think everybody forgets how popular the 32X was the Christmas of 1994. I think everybody views the 32X as a complete flop of a system. But that first Christmas it was out, it really sold like crazy.
And I'm sorry, I like the 32X. There are a lot of good games on it.
Yeah, it's I know in the interview I've mentioned the 7800, but the 32X is another awesome system for game ports.
If we had longer for that interview, that would have been another great question.
Yeah,
hopefully he listens to this episode.
I hope so, because like the first really good Star Wars arcade port was 32X. And you had a great Mortal Kombat 2 port and a great NBA Jam port and Space Harrier that is arguably better than the arcade version of Space Harrier on there.
And I actually like Calibri. I might be the only person, but I
Was
like
that an arcade port? Was that an arcade game?
Oh, not a port. I'm just saying
okay.
good games on 32X.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, definitely a good game. But I mean, like, Virtual Racing, great port. Virtual Fighter, great port. WWF Arcade game, awesome port. So, yeah. And then, yeah, it's really because the Saturn came out a few months, May 1995. I mean, that's what killed the 32X. It just wasn't. It's not that the system wasn't selling and people didn't want it. People were buying a ton of them at Christmas.
So that might be a good. If listeners want to write in to answer a question, I know this isn't a Facebook question. We usually don't have episode questions actually in the podcast, but we were just saying like the Virtual Boy is getting less hate than it used to. The 32X seems to be getting a lot less hate than it used to. Do you guys agree with that? Are there other systems that seem to be coming around and some gems are coming out? Maybe they were a diamond in the rough back then. Maybe the hate was deserved. Maybe it wasn't. Email at retrogameclub.net.
Yeah, I think the Jaguar today gets more hate than it deserves. I think the Jaguar is the opposite example of this. I think it's a system that gets more hate over time, when in reality it's not a great system, but it has like 3 or 4 really incredible games.
Yeah, and I think the 3DO was a horrible business model, but pretty good system actually. So some good games on there. I don't know.
You want to get the email from Zach, who is going to who's going to not appreciate our comments in Super Mario World?
Yes. Zach's about to, yeah. So he loved that I picked Super Mario World as the game club game, and coincidentally, he just started playing it because it's free on Switch Online. And he never beat this one back in the day, but a friend of his had it just like me, but he found it too difficult, so he never really bought it for himself. More recently, he hasn't, just like 20, 30 minutes at night after the kids go to bed. And he kind of got stuck in the Forest of Illusion. And then he wrote a second email right after that saying, guess what? It was further than I thought. And he beat the game. He didn't, go 100% complete on it, but he got a good ending. And he thinks he's done with it for now. So that seems like a moderate to fair review. Not, it's not like his new favorite game, but and he's looking for recommendations that are currently on the NES, SNES, Switch Online store. Not something that's obvious like Metroid, Zelda, or Super Mario 1, 2, or 3. And my recommendation is Balloon Fight. And I'll go into that in a minute, but what's your recommendation?
I was only going to pick one game. I mean, there's 10 games, at least on the service, I'd recommend. But kind of an oddball one is Solomon's Key, which also an arcade port, strangely enough. Although you would never think it's an arcade game. It's like, well, you talked about Rygar, right? It's the same kind of deal where it's technically an arcade port, but it's also a very different game.
And isn't that a really expensive cart to buy?
Yeah, it might be. It might be. It's I think maybe you're thinking of the sequel.
Oh.
I think there was an extremely rare sequel. Let me double check that later. But Solomon's Key is like an action puzzle game.
It's like $14, $8.
Yeah.
So not
now
bad.
look for Solomon's. Now look for the sequel.
What's that one called again?
It might be called Solomon's Key 2. According to pricecharting.com, loose it is $71.09.
Wow.
Yeah. Ooh, wait, Amazon allegedly has a copy. Let's see here. $60.04. Oh, if that's for the Japanese import, it's a Famicom version. Yeah. If a Famicom game is over $50, the US game is really expensive.
Wow. Yeah. So, but that's a good game. The first one, Solomon's Key.
Yes. So next episode.
Yes. I changed up, calling Audible here. My next Game Club game is Balloon Fight. And I would like everyone to do Iwata's challenge. So Iwata, the famed coder of this, had an Easter egg in it where if you did what's it called, the balloon travel, or the one where you're not 2-player, you're just on the balloon trip, maybe.
You're trying to get through like this is on
there's
NES
sparks
Remix.
flying around.
Yeah, there's like sparks flying around, and you're just trying to collect balloons, and there's like challenge stages. These are all, if you get NES Remix, you can go do these stages directly.
Yeah, but so this is free on Switch right now, but if you get all the first 20 balloons without missing one or dying, all the balloons change color. And it was a little Easter egg you put in there, and it's Iwata's challenge, and I challenge you all to do it, and please write in and let us know about it. And what's so that's Balloon Fight. What's your game?
You know, we were talking about since I saw Space Invaders on the show notes, I'm going to go with Space Invaders Part 2. Which
I've never played this one.
Is it the first game sequel ever? I don't know. It came out in 1979. And it's hard for me to imagine there is a video game sequel older than Space Invaders 2.
That's a good question. Again, if our listeners know, email at retrogameclub.net.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're talking about some kind of like Pong variant, maybe. I don't know.
I can't. Yeah, like does the Odyssey or something have sequels? I don't know.
So yeah, it's and then there's a bunch of different home ports too, and it's on a lot of collections and all that stuff. And topic next time, we don't usually know that in advance, but it is going to be, if everything goes as planned, it will be Black Friday of Christmas past. Black Fridays of Black Friday past.
Yes.
So
Something like that.
Specific year. We're going to pick a year and reflect on what Black Friday shoppers were maiming each other over that year.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
But all right. I think that wraps up episode 28.
Yeah, again, what's the email address?
Email at retrogameclub.net. And thank you, Zach, for running our Facebook page. If you want to go to the Facebook page without dealing with politics or cat memes, you go to, facebook.retrogameclub.net, and it takes you right there.
Yes. We might have some retro gaming cat memes on there, but I think that's acceptable. Yeah, so thank you again to Zach for helping with that, and thank you all for listening.